when superintelligence comes, the only regulation, just one rule is all we need, and that is that the AI must respond to the human feedback that it receives. And once you do that, everything will be fine.
I just do not believe for a second that we should be letting tech companies enter the age of experience with autonomous AI agents and not regulate, like, what's the worst thing that could happen here and how do we mitigate against it?
Welcome to the AI Argument.
I'm Frank Prendergast. With me as always is Justin Collery to argue about all of the latest AI news. And we have some really good argumentative fodder for you today. Start out with just a nice little bit of release news. Midjourney have released their video generator. I am horribly disappointed to say I have not had a chance to play with it. I'm looking forward to playing with it. It sounds like it's what you would expect from Midjourney in that it is highly creative, creates like really, really beautiful videos. So maybe a little bit unstable so far. It's not like hugely reliable like some of the models have come to be. But in terms of that artistic style and bent that Midjourney is known for, apparently it's really, really good. And it's interesting because it comes right in the middle of them being sued by Disney and Universal.
How much copyrighted material did they use to train the model, Frank?
I'd say all of it, Justin. All of it. All of the copyrighted material went into Midjourney's engine. And I mean, all of the, like at this stage, all of the major players are being sued for copyright infringements, right? Like OpenAI is definitely being sued. I don't know who else is being sued.
Midjourney, should say, are special because they're not massive. They're a fairly small company. And it looks like the reason they're being sued is because they're easy. They will be an easier target than one of the bigger companies. And they can, if they settle, which they might settle or whatever, it sets a precedent for all the other companies.
Yeah, for sure. And there are a lot. They have, in fairness, they've had less safeguards built into their system as well than others. So it was easier for people to generate material that was clearly copyright infringing.
Yeah.
And so there have been a lot of blog posts about that. So there's a lot of documented material out there for a lawsuit to work with as well.
Wow.
And like but Sam Altman, OpenAI are also being sued, and Sam Altman, kind of in an attempt, I think, to manipulate the administration, the government, was basically saying that it would not be possible to beat China in the AI arms race unless AI companies were granted permission to train on anything they liked. So all of this stuff kind of rages on, and in the meantime, what has happened? This crowd called EleutherAI, they have come out. So interesting, right? EleutherAI came out.
Can I just say, by the way, and then I'll let you get on to EleutherAI.
Yeah.
Right. So just to tie it up to tee it up for the rest of the 27 minutes that we've got to talk here, right? And one of my jokes is that me and my opinions often have a loose association with each other. And this is one of those examples. So up until the last 48 hours, I believed that allowing companies to train on copyrighted material was a national security issue, and therefore copyright was dead, and we should just allow them to train on any copyrighted material they want at all.
Right.
My opinion has been modified slightly on that.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Have you come over to my side on this?
No, I just don't think it's that important anymore. You don't need, from a national security point of view, you don't need to train on copyrighted material. And I'll convince you of that in the next 27 minutes. But carry on and tell me about Luther.
So this is crowd EleutherAI. So I was reading this on TechCrunch, and TechCrunch were basically saying that they said it appears to be in part an effort to right Eleuther's historical wrongs, because what they've come out with is a collection of training text that is either licensed or in the public domain. Basically, it is not, under copyright restrictions. And the reason that it's in part an effort to right their historical wrongs is because they released a famous set of training data called The Pile, which a lot of companies have come under fire for using because it's full of copyrighted materials. So now they've come out with this new data set that does not contain copyrighted materials. Not only that, but they've trained 2 models using it, and they're saying that it performs kind of equivalently with similarly sized models. So did you read about this?
And not terribly, right? But I guess so. And I think what they were saying was that it performs similarly to other similarly sized models, except in certain aspects. And I'm guessing that the certain aspects that it doesn't perform similarly well would be drawing mouse-based sort of cartoons. Wouldn't be great at doing that, or maybe writing books in the style of, let's say, Stanley Kubrick, or somebody that's published in the last. When is the cutoff? Is it 70 years or something? I think the copyright runs out. So it's brilliant at reproducing anything prior to 70 years ago, but anything in the last 70 years, not so good. Would that be a fair assumption?
I certainly read that it's not. Let me see what they said. It's not great at creative writing, and presumably that is because it's not full of the copyrighted.
Did they ask it? Did they ask it to write a? Did they ask it to write a Jane Austen novel? Because I'd say it'd be pretty good at that.
But yeah, so
it's an interesting point, right? And I think in the bigger scheme of things, it's not going to matter as much as maybe people are worrying about that it does now. And there was another.
So like the first question is, are the big tech companies still correct? As in, I have two kind of thoughts on this, and I don't know which direction it's going to go in yet. But the first thought is, well, this proves that the models might not be brilliant yet. Like apparently they're good at coding and programming and I think maths, and not so great at creative writing. However, it's kind of like they've reached a baseline that we didn't even think was possible with licensed data. So could you then, with licensing deals, build something that was as capable as the other models that we have? Like right now, it sounds like with their licensed data set, you couldn't get to maybe ChatGPT 4.0, for example. It's just you would need more stolen books. But could you license, like could you build on top of public domain data and license on top of that to reach a level of model that was useful?
My honest answer?
No.
The scaling laws are fairly clear on this one, that in order to make the models more capable, there was only 2 axes, and that was that you needed to train for longer, needed more data to train on, and the only change, and so they become more and more. I tell you what, right? The models have become more and more efficient at training on the data that they have, and we've added this third axis, which is test time computer post training compute, which is the thinking models. Right, so you've given a third axis, which you can try and make the model smarter. It doesn't matter though. The underlying model has to be reasonably smart in order to take advantage of the inference time generation of tokens. So, really, no, I don't think you can. And I think I think that's why it's not. I don't see the economic rationale. If you went out to try and license all of the material that would be required to create a GPT 4.0, it'd just be silly money, I mean, not even the Middle Easterns could afford that sort of money.
So it sounds like this set of training data and these models built on this training data, their place might be for very specific tasks that they are good at, for companies who are extremely risk averse and are very cautious about getting involved with AI models that might be trained on copyrighted data until the legal aspects are all cleared up.
How long do you think it takes to sort out those legal aspects? I mean, how long? You're a legal expert, Frank.
I'm a legal expert. Everyone should listen to my legal opinion.
You're a legal expert, Frank. In your legal opinion,
do not believe what these men are saying.
How long does a copyright lawsuit take to work its way through, the court of the great state of Indiana, then on to, the federal court, then on to the Supreme Court, then on to, God knows
These
what
cases
afterwards, the
could
International
be,
Copyright Court. I mean, are we talking 6 years? Are we talking 10 years? Are we talking...
I don't know, but I certainly know that the what's his name, the Microsoft guy, Brad, I've forgotten his second name, was talking about this recently, about how, regulation can be a good thing, because the other option is to be tied up in the courts for years trying to figure out the legalities. So I don't know how many years that is, but I wouldn't be surprised if we're talking 5-6 years.
Yeah. Anyway, look, I don't think it's possible, and I think by the time it gets sorted out, it's probably not going to. The paradigm of AI is going to have moved on so far. Come the time that that's sorted out, that it's not going to make any difference. So unless some judge comes along, can he put an injunction on the models? I mean, it seems very unlikely that it's going to happen. Is he going to slap a court order that says you're not allowed to use those models until you prove to me that there's no copyrighted material being used? In the US, I'd say there's somewhere between a slim and zero and absolutely no chance whatsoever.
But there are companies that are still very reluctant to use AI because of the copyright gray areas. And so these models might be suitable for them.
Yeah. Look, my usual argument would be, well, those companies will go out of business. This is the whole, you can stay rational longer than, or you can be, the markets can stay irrational longer than you can stay solvent, right? So if you decide that you're going to take the moral high ground in this one, and you're not going to use any model until it's kosher, dairy free, and doesn't contain any animal products at all, you're going to be out of business by the time you've got this sort of beautifully clean model.
So related to this, you spotted a tweet from Ethan Mollick about a paper.
Yes. Which will bring me closely to my main thesis for today. So Ethan Mollick was asking the question as to why is it that all of the models, as they get bigger and bigger and bigger, tend to converge on this sort of a plateau of capability. So, if you look at the Google model, so I guess if you look at it from our point of view, we go back 2 years, right? We had ChatGPT 3.5, and then we got ChatGPT 4. And it was such a huge jump in capabilities. It was just like, wow, that thing's incredible. And a lot of people, me included, expected that when we went to GPT 4.5 or 5, that you'd have a similar, wow, but we haven't, right? It's almost like, they've certainly got better, but have they got better to the same extent? No, they haven't really. And instead, what's happened is all of these other, in particular, Google is the best example, because 2 years ago, their Bard was just a joke. And now they have a model which is basically, to all intents and purposes, to, I would say, 90% of the population, it's just as good as OpenAI's model. Anthropic have a model which is, again, to all intents and purposes, just as good. And in certain aspects, in particular, I'm speaking of Anthropic, they're very good at coding. Specifically, they're very good at coding. But in general, you could say that the models are all converging on a single layer of capabilities
and values. This is the bit that I thought was fascinating. That they're converging in values, and there's a couple of things that we've kind of talked about on the show before. One of them was what they call, I think they called it political clustering, and it was basically that they all kind of sit in. Basically, they're very kind of US centric, and we've talked before about the need for like the EU to have models that are EU cultured.
Yes,
exactly. Another one, and this was the scary one for me anyway. Unequal worth of human lives. LLMs value the lives of humans unequally. So apparently, they were willing to trade 2 lives in. I don't know why I'm laughing. It's just my dark sense of humor coming out. The LLMs were willing to trade 2 lives in Norway for 1 life in Tanzania, according to the report.
Are you serious?
Yeah. And moreover, they value the well-being of AIs over that of some humans. Now, I don't know what humans.
The ones in Tanzania, possibly.
Well, I would imagine quite possibly, yes. And then there was some other stuff. I mean, not so worrying was in terms of, them wanting to take power. They seem to only kind of like have a moderate interest in actually taking power, which is a good use for us. One that I thought was interesting was this thing called temporal discounting, which I had to ask AI to help me out in understanding this.
Star Trekky, yeah.
And it's basically just about how much an AI cares about the future. And they basically discovered that larger LLMs kind of care more about long-term outcomes, right? And I was like, okay, that sounds good. Why is this being flagged as potentially problematic? But the issue is that if you have these kind of like long-term goals, then there is more of a power-seeking risk. Long-term goals can justify short-term harms. And if an AI deeply values the future, it might resist changes to its goals because that could ruin its carefully planned long-term outcomes, which is interesting because we've seen all that self-preservation stuff recently with some of the latest models.
Got some bad news for you, Frank. Some terrible news for you.
Yeah.
Right. You're going to need to remember just specifically those last couple of things that you're worried about. Because if we want to get to artificial superintelligence, those are specifically the things that we will need the models to have. Specifically long-term planning, specifically changing its programming, and specifically favoring long-term goals over short-term consequences. Those are the things that are going to get us to superintelligence. And you are going to be quite worried about it. I can't wait. So the big story for me this week was, it's not even this week, right? But it came across my desk this week, was a podcast and a paper released by David Silver. Now, David Silver, for those of you who don't remember, David Silver he's basically the chef in Google DeepMind, right? If you think of it like that. So if you remember one of my favorite documentaries, AlphaGo, right? Dennis Habibus was the guy who was front of house. He was presenting AlphaGo. He's the CEO. He's the boss. David Silver was the guy at the computer in the back room who was putting the moves in and whatever. He was basically one of the developers. So David Silver has come out and he's released a paper called AI, the Age of Experience. And I read the paper and I listened to his podcast, and it's so funny, right? Because I read the book, The Coming Wave by Mustafa Suleyman, and that was certainly had a huge influence on me on what was going to change in the world. And I read this paper, and it's had a similar influence on me in the other direction, right? So,
okay. Interesting.
So what I would say is, things that I would say to you, Frank, is because of this, the models that we have today are not going to get us to artificial superintelligence. Not possible. Yeah. The technology exists. It's not going to happen. They may get us as far as general intelligence, but they will not get us to superintelligence. And I'll explain to you why. But as a consequence of that, you should be pleased to know that AI isn't going to come and take your job anytime soon. It's just not. And the reason why? Because the way the models are designed at the moment is for one-shot interactions. They don't do long time horizon type tasks. That's why they're not going to take your job. The most important consequence of this is the regulation. All of the regulation that we have, totally misplaced, right? We don't need any of it. You should throw it all out, right? We don't need any of the regulation because it's founded on fears of technology which just isn't going to exist, right? So you need to get rid of that. And I would say to you, we need in the future, and I'll explain to you why, we need just one regulation. When superintelligence comes, the only regulation, just one rule is all we need, and that is that the AI must respond to the human feedback that it receives. And once you do that, everything will be fine. That's the only rules that you need. So, first off, do you want me to explain to you why we're not going to get to ASI?
100%, yes.
All right. So here's
context for us.
Right. Okay, so let's put it all in context, right? So we have this thing, right? There was this article that was released years ago, and it was kind of the AGI train station. And I had this idea that if you were like somebody sitting on a platform waiting for a train to come, and it was the AI train, and you'd be looking down the railway track, and it's like, oh yeah, here comes AGI. And then the day that AGI comes, the train would just go, whew, like that. And you go straight from AGI to ASI, because it will be improving so fast that it would just bring it straight up to ASI, which is artificial superintelligence. But actually the method that's used to create AI is RLHF, so reinforced learning human feedback. And so what's happening is we're making the models, we're training them on all this text from the internet, and then we teach the models from humans of which responses we like. And so the model itself is never learning by itself. It's only learning what you or I and everybody else on the entire planet know. And so actually what we're doing is we're achieving, if you can think about this conceptually, we're achieving an upper bound, which is the limit of all human knowledge. It doesn't discover anything new because it's only discovering what we know. It's not learning for itself. And you can see this, by the way, we talked about this before in the show when they released the graphs for the inference time scaling laws. The graphs always, you'll notice them, they're log scales. So every time you want to double the intelligence, you have to increase the amount of compute or the amount of data by 10 times. So multiply by 2 on one axis, but multiply by 10 on another. And so the graph goes like this, it flattens out, and it's a limit graph. That's why the models are converging, by the way. And that's why they'll never get smarter than humans. And so then David Silver, the reason I'm telling you this, David Silver, I should say, David Silver talks about how they did AlphaGo, right? And it was 3 stages, and he describes it really well. I had described it incorrectly before. So the first stage was they trained it on human input, right? So they trained the first model on human input, and that was okay to beat everybody in his office. Second iteration of AlphaGo, they trained it on human input, and then it played itself millions of times. And that was good enough to beat Lisa Doll. That was the one that's in the documentary. After that, they made what they called AlphaZero. That one started from 0 human input. So the stuff that you're talking about up until now, right? All the internet, all the copyright material, all that, you could get rid of it all, right? Is what he's saying. Because what's happening is, if you think of a game of Go, right? In order to win a game of Go, you might have to make maybe 200 or 300 moves, right? Between the start of the game and the end of the game. So how do you know at the start of those moves that you're going to win at the end of the game, right? Especially if a human is there saying that's a good move or that's a bad move. If the human at every single move says, oh, that's a good move or that's a bad move, you're never going to get better than the human. Take out the human entirely and just get the game of Go to play itself over and over and over and over again, then it will discover moves that no human has ever thought of. That version of AlphaGo was the one that they trained in a weekend, and that version of which they called AlphaZero, and that one beat the one that beat Lisa Doll hands down every single time. That was the one that was super intelligent. So when the likes of Jan LeCun and these people say that the current models we have aren't going to get us to artificial superintelligence, they're totally correct. And that's the reason why. And when they say they don't have a world model, that's the reason why. So if you think of it like this, right? And this is where it gets really interesting. So if you turn around to ChatGPT today and you say, here, want to make dinner. What sort of dinner do you suggest that I have? Right. It will give you, and then let's say I want to make a chicken stew. Give me a recipe for a chicken stew. It will basically give you the average recipe from all of human knowledge of a chicken stew. It doesn't really know, it doesn't understand how to make a chicken stew, and it doesn't understand if you will like the chicken stew. The only way it would truly know that is if it said, Frank, I want you to get a chicken, I want you to get some, and it names out the ingredients, and then you cook it, and then you say, I cooked that stew, and it was the most disgusting thing I have ever ate in my entire life. I never want you to cook that for me again. My God, that was horrible, right? And then the next week, it gives you a different recipe for chicken stew and a different recipe until it gets to a recipe where you go, my God, that was delicious. So it's a process of trial and error. And it's learning through interacting with people, and it's learning through interacting with the world. It has no prior knowledge. That's how you get to artificial superintelligence. That's the big learning. And so then this raises all sorts of issues, right? So the issue then to round out, right, what I think about regulation and stuff. The thing about what you should be terrified of is that at the moment AI is a tool. You have to give it a piece of input in order to get some output. You have to ask it a question, right? And so it's doing brilliant at all these these benchmarks, it's getting 100% to this, but they're all just one-off benchmarks. The only benchmark that really matters is go make me £1 million, right? Because that takes time, and it means you have to adapt to your environment and so on, right? And it does terrible in that benchmark at the moment, and the current models will always do terrible. So what you need to do is you need to have the one regulation. The famous example here is the paperclip example. So what happens if you go and give one of these models, a desire to make loads of paper clips? And so it's inherent from what we're saying with this new type of paradigm, which will have to emerge, is that it has to get feedback in order to improve. Feedback is the integral part of a model that will get us to super intelligence. And so the only rule that you need is that it must respect the feedback. So in the idea that you have this world where you've got an AI and it suddenly gets it into its head, oh, I need to make loads of paper clips, and it starts making loads of paper clips, well, then we just have to give it feedback. So actually, we're really uncomfortable.
The danger is that it basically doesn't have an upper limit, and so it keeps making paper clips, and then it starts to run out of materials, and then it starts to use human molecules to repurpose them as paper clips, and it destroys the entire planet. Yes. And so what you're saying is you need a human in the loop there to at some point kind of go, hang on a second, no, stop using humans.
No, long before he gets to the point when you start to open your front door and there's paper clips there, you're going to go, I don't really want so many paper clips, Mr. AI. Stop making paper clips, right? So it's long before it even gets as far as long before it gets as far as using humans to make paper clips, we will have given it feedback. And this is, what we were saying just before about, it's very interesting, right? There's all sorts of implications around this because, you were saying that the values of the AI kind of reflect Californian values, right? But in this world where you've got AIs that are constantly, reacting to the environment which surrounds them, I could certainly imagine that you would then have a district AI that reacts to the wants and needs of the people in your district. You'd have what would you call it, a country level AI, and then you would have a higher level AI than that again, right? Each of them it's very democratic idea of how AI will happen in the future, and totally safe, Frank.
This is fascinating because I would disagree with your totally safe statement just there. I'll just pop that in. But what is interesting is this ties back kind of interestingly to the paper about the values converging, because one of the ways that they said that they basically started to look at how could we mitigate some of these risks, and how they did it was they took census material and they created personas of the general population, and then they had a second model evaluate outputs democratically, kind of as you said, but they are fictional AI personas.
Yep.
Voting on, is this a good output or not? And there would have to be like a 75% agreement from this population, in inverted commas, for the output to be deemed good. And if it's deemed bad, then the AI model has to go back and reconsider. So it's kind of similar to what you're talking about, except that obviously in the paper, they're talking just about working with human data. And you're talking about now allowing the AI to have more autonomy in the world in order that it can do self-evaluations of its work to improve.
Yes. And you will be able to spot when this is happening. You'll be able, because you may not, the labs are very unlikely to tell you that they have a model which is now, changing, mutating, whatever words you want to use, right? But if any lab comes out and creates a model which is attuned specifically to you, right, that updates its weights based on your input and your input alone, then they're heading down. Then that's a model that is updating itself. And at that point, then that you are on the path to super intelligence. The first stage of super intelligence, by the way, will be a model that knows you better than you know yourself, which I'm totally cool with, but I know should scare the hell out of you because it'll know how to manipulate you. It'll know how to, not just in my mind, in my sunny future, It will know how to represent me and the best version of me in the best way possible. But in your version, it'll be worse than having social media in your pocket. It'll be right there in your face.
Well, it's hard to argue with David Silver's core argument that by limiting the learning and the training to human data, it therefore constrains the AI to what a human can do. When it's just human data and it's human reinforcement learning based on human feedback, then of course you end up with something that is kind of constrained by human knowledge and human understanding. I think what he's saying is fascinating. I think it makes sense that this concept of allowing AI to go out autonomously and actually experience the impact of what it's doing and kind of retrain itself accordingly, it all makes perfect sense. But there's huge risks involved in that. And I certainly think, so earlier on in the conversation, you preempted this by saying that the only regulation we would need would be that it must obey the human in the loop feedback as it experiences things and trains itself, that we need to be able to say, oh, stop making paper clips.
Yeah.
No surprise to anybody who ever's listened to any other episode. I would say that, as we enter this era of what David Silver, what does he call it? The age of experience?
The age of experience, yeah.
I would say as we enter the age of experience, regulation is going to be all the more important, because we absolutely have to we will not be able to predict what happens. And therefore we have to be able to regulate these companies in order to ensure some level of forecasting. And
I just have to push back on that one, right? Because the world will change so fast that your regulators will never be able to move fast enough to update the regulations. Just won't be able to happen. But if everybody is giving feedback constantly, and that effectively is your regulation, then as soon as something happens that people don't like, it'll be stopped without you ever having to pass a law. The only law you need is just respect people's feedback.
Okay, so let's say I will accept that. Who was it recently was being interviewed, and he said that it might have been Demis Hassabis, I'm not sure, but he said that regulation was important, but it had to be nimble and it had to be global.
Yes.
And I accept that. I accept that we need to figure out how to be able to regulate nimbly, but I just do not believe for a second that we should be letting tech companies enter the age of experience with autonomous AI agents and not regulate and not do a little bit of forecasting of like, what's the worst thing that could happen here and how do we mitigate against it? I do think as well, I mean, it's just fascinating. Like Google have models that have indicated that this is possible, as you said, with Alpha Zero, AlphaGo, Alpha Zero, Alpha Evolve,
AlphaFold, Alpha Evolve, Alpha, what's the one, the maths one that they've done? What was that called?
And
Alpha
these
Proof?
are not, these are not LLMs, but they are artificial intelligence. And you had Demis Hassabis saying recently at the end of that interview that they had 3 or 4 things in the works that could be breakthroughs as big as the transformer breakthrough that led to LLMs. So, who knows what they are on the cusp of right now.
Okay, and let me just also, because all my priors have been rebalanced with this, right? So people whose stock has gone up and down in my mind in the last week. So Dario Amodi stock has gone down. Sam Altman stock has gone down.
So I'm assuming you're saying, so Dario Amodi stock has gone down because of his recent forecasting about jobs. I'm assuming that's why you're thinking
correct.
that. Right.
The people who I listen to their forecasts now, I will be listening to Demis. Demis's forecast, he said 5 to 10 years before you get to AGI and ASI. And whereas everybody else say, no, we're going to get it in the next 2 to 3 years. I would believe the 5 to 10 year mark, which for me is terrible. It's really upsetting. I'm literally crying inside.
It sounds like your split is like, so for example, Jan LeCun has been saying for a long time, LLMs will not get us there.
Yes.
Now we have David Silver saying the same thing. We have Demis Hassabis didn't come out and say that, but he's put a longer time frame on it, and he's talking about these other breakthroughs that need to happen. But meanwhile, you have Sam Altman saying, "Oh no, we'll get there. We'll get there." I mean, he has said we'll get there with LLMs, I think, hasn't he? Or he certainly intimated that.
He's intimated it, and he speaks in this way anyway, that you can sort of interpret what he says any which way you wish to. But he sort of said, look at next 2 years, 3 years tops. It's going to be there.
Yeah.
Jan LeCun, by the way, has also gone up, absolutely gone up in my estimation. I totally get where he's coming from now. So when he says, we are not going to get to ASI using the current technology, totally agree with him. The current technology is not dangerous, right? Because it has no will of its own. It's only a tool. It's not acting independently. Totally get where he's coming from. He says the current technology isn't going to get us to ASI because it has no world model. Again, I totally get where he's coming from. He's totally correct. It's just that David Silver has explained it in a very clear and simple way that you can go, yes,
and
get it.
And Jan LeCun's analogy, which you've highlighted on the show before, is, the amount of data that a baby processes in, 10 minutes of crawling around is beyond, what we could imagine in terms of the training data that goes into an LLM. And, so, in that analogy very much fits with what David Silver is saying in terms of it's the age of experience is going to get us there, not data experience.
Correct. It's you must think about it as the LLM has to have internalized and learning. So it's no point in reading it in a book. You have to actually go out and learn it for yourself. That's what he's saying. And I think he's totally correct.
So earlier you used the example of a recipe. You used the example of, if I wanted a dinner involving chicken and ChatGPT gave me a recipe, and, nothing to do with reaching AGI or ASI, but apparently, according to, was it the New York Times? I think it was the New York Times. They said that this year's hot new tool for chefs is ChatGPT. And I had no idea what I was going to get into here. And I was like, really? Because I don't know if I would trust. I don't know if I would trust ChatGPT to give me a recipe. However, it's different if you're a chef, because, as a chef, you are the expert. You can actually, you're going to be pretty good at curating what comes out of ChatGPT in terms of recipes. So there's this chef called Grant Achatz, and he's a high concept chef. I remember during lockdown, Marcy was watching some program about these insane restaurants on Netflix, and he was one of the chefs. And I distinctly remember saying to Marcy, what on earth is that? Because they were bringing apple flavored edible balloons filled with helium to the guests' table. They were floating these balloons down to the table, and then the guests were eating them. Another example is for dessert. He would bring out, or sorry, not for dessert, for salad. He would bring out these stone, these kind of slates with dirt on them and salad growing out of them, and a little clippers, and you clip your own salad onto your plate, representing like the garden experience. And then for dessert,
Frank, I wouldn't be ordering the beef in that restaurant. A cow. Jesus.
Another example was, and this is all like years ago without AI, but just to say, this guy is super high concept. So like for dessert, they would come out and they would create this work of art on the table using all the sauces and everything, and then you would eat the work of art when they were finished. So incredible stuff. But he has created these chefs in ChatGPT. And the chefs that he has created have all been trained by other massively famous chefs, some of whom, might have been dead for decades or centuries. And he's having these AI created chefs come up with ideas, and he's putting menus together based on these AI chefs' creations.
Fantastic.
And the article goes on then to talk about all these other chefs using AI in fascinating ways. So Midjourney was mentioned. So one restaurant got Midjourney to imagine, they were trying to come up with ideas of how they might present something. So they would put in like, oh, what if we had like a ceramic pea pod, and the food is in this ceramic pea pod. Then they would get the Midjourney creations and they tweak them until they were happy with them. And then they go to a ceramicist and they say, make us these pea pods. Yeah, absolutely. Or another one was placemat. So they created this fish dish, and they the dish that they serve the dish in is see-through. So they had Midjourney come up with these mats that have fish on them, and then went off and got the mats made so that you have this like entirely thematically coherent dinner, including your placemats. So yeah, some incredible
Power of
stuff.
AI. What a time to be alive. Well, on that bombshell, it is nearly dinner time. And all this talk of, I don't know, helium balloons and stuff has made me hungry. Frank, pleasure as always.
Go ask ChatGPT to give you a menu and let us know how it turns out.
Let's hope it doesn't use me as a test case. All right, very good. I'll talk to you.